The morning was unusually quiet at the military base. Usually, the sound of boots on concrete echoed across the training grounds, radios crackled and orders shouted, but today, something felt different. Soldiers moved with their usual precision, yet their eyes kept flicking toward the main entrance, as if they were expecting someone extraordinary. And indeed they were. Steven Seagal walked in with his usual calm. His presence alone seemed to slow the bustling energy of the base. There was no swagger, no loud announcements, just the soft sound of his footsteps and the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Officers nodded respectfully, soldiers straightened in their stance, and a subtle hush fell over the area. Something about the way he carried himself made everyone instinctively aware that today would not be like any ordinary training session. Then it happened. The general, a man known for his strict discipline and iron fist approach, stepped forward, his face unreadable. For a moment no one moved. Time seemed to stretch. And then, in one sudden motion, he reached out and grabbed Steven by the hair. Cameras caught every detail. The firm grip of the general's hand, the sharp gasp of nearby soldiers, the instant tension that shot through the room. The soldiers froze, unsure if they should intervene. Whispers passed quickly from one officer to another. Did he just? He's not moving, is he okay? But Steven remained calm. Not a flinch. Not a single muscle betrayed fear, anger, or surprise. His face stayed composed, almost serene. The kind of calm that made the room feel heavier with every second. People strained their necks to see, and phones slowly came out to record what was happening. Everyone knew that this was no ordinary interaction. Even the most disciplined soldiers exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that they were witnessing something unusual, something that would be talked about for years. The general tightened his grip, expecting a reaction, expecting resistance. But Steven simply stood there, his eyes calm, scanning the room, and the slightest hint of a smile flickered across his face. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but in that moment, it spoke volumes. Who was really in control? Who held the real power in the room? And that's when it hit everyone watching. This was just the beginning. Something was about to happen that none of them expected. And the only way to truly understand what Steven Seagal would do next was to watch carefully, every single second. Wait till the end. It will change everything you thought you knew about strength, control, and respect. The military base sat in the middle of a vast, barren stretch of desert, where the wind carried a faint scent of sand and metal. Rows of training grounds spread out like a miniature city of discipline. Perfectly aligned obstacles, flags snapping in the light breeze, and the quiet hum of machinery in the background. It was early morning, the sky a pale wash of gold and gray, casting long shadows across the concrete. The air was crisp, yet heavy with anticipation, as if everyone could sense something unusual was about to unfold. Officers in their crisp uniforms moved with precision, their polished boots clicking sharply on the concrete. Every movement was practiced, every step measured. Soldiers followed their usual routines, inspecting weapons, adjusting belts, checking radios, but their glances repeatedly shifted toward the main gate. Murmurs began to circulate quietly. Is he really here? They said Steven Seagal was coming. Nobody spoke loud enough to be noticed by commanding officers, but the undercurrent of curiosity and tension was palpable. And then he arrived. Steven Seagal walked through the gates as if the weight of the entire base rested lightly on his shoulders. He wore his usual simple attire, dark shirt, loose-fitting trousers, and combat boots. But even something so ordinary seemed extraordinary in this moment. The contrast between his calm demeanor and the disciplined intensity of the base created a strange energy. Soldiers instinctively straightened, officers paused mid-step, and a silence heavier than the desert heat settled across the training ground. The general, known for his rigid command style and short temper, observed closely. His sharp eyes studied every detail, Seagal's posture, his calm gaze, the way he moved. There was a tension in the air, an invisible line stretching between the two men. For the soldiers, it was almost cinematic. The quiet was punctuated only by distant machinery and the faint rustle of uniforms. Even the flags seemed to hang a little still, as though holding their breath. As Steven approached the central training area, the soldiers noticed subtle gestures. A slight nod to a junior officer, a soft adjustment of his belt, the quiet placement of his hands behind his back. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy. But there was an unmistakable authority in every small movement. It was the kind of presence that made people pause, almost instinctively aware that this man commanded attention not through force, but through calm confidence. Nearby, younger soldiers whispered to one another, eyes wide. "I've never seen him in person," one said almost reverently. Another replied, Why isn't he even reacting? Their voices were low, almost afraid of breaking the spell that seemed to hang over the base. Cameras from the media crew were raised discreetly, recording the subtle but magnetic tension, every small reaction, every glance exchanged between Seagal and the general. Even the base's staff, cooks, technicians, and administrative officers, seemed drawn toward the main courtyard. The atmosphere shifted from ordinary military routine to something resembling anticipation before a storm. The soldiers weren't just waiting for training to begin, they were witnessing the setup for a moment that could change the dynamic of the entire base. The general finally stepped forward, his uniform immaculate, face hard and unreadable. Steven stopped a few meters away, relaxed but alert, his calm gaze meeting the general's with unshakable composure. The air was heavy with unspoken questions. Who would make the first move? Who truly held control? Every soldier in the courtyard felt the weight of the moment. It wasn't just about protocol or hierarchy, it was about presence, authority, and the subtle battle that words and gestures alone could not capture. And as Steven slowly shifted his weight from one foot to another, the tiniest flicker of a smile hinted at the unspoken confidence he carried. Soldiers leaned forward, officers straightened, and the entire base seemed to wait collectively, aware that something remarkable was about to happen. The calm before the storm was more intense than any action-packed sequence could ever be. This wasn't just a training session. This was a masterclass in presence, patience, and quiet power, and everyone watching knew it. The courtyard felt almost electric. Every soldier, officer, and staff member seemed frozen in place, their eyes fixed on the two men at the center, Steven Seagal and the general. The morning sunlight bounced off polished boots and crisp uniforms, but it did little to lighten the growing tension. Even the soft rustle of the flags in the desert breeze seemed amplified, echoing faintly across the concrete. Every detail mattered and everyone noticed it. The general, tall and imposing, took a measured step closer. His jaw was set, his brow furrowed, and his eyes locked onto Steven with a look that seemed to say, "I am in control here." Yet, despite the strength in his posture, there was a subtle hesitation, a brief flicker of doubt that no one but the keenest observer might notice. Steven, in contrast, remained perfectly calm. His shoulders relaxed, his gaze steady. He didn't speak. He didn't move unnecessarily. He simply observed. Nearby soldiers whispered in hushed tones, careful not to attract attention. "Why isn't he reacting?" one asked. Another shook their head, eyes wide. "He's calm, almost too calm." There was a mix of disbelief and curiosity in their voices. Phones were slowly raised to record, but even the camera operators found themselves hesitant, almost afraid to break the tension with any sudden movement. Every person present seemed to instinctively know they were witnessing something out of the ordinary. The general flexed his arms slightly, a subtle demonstration of authority, and the faintest smirk appeared on his face. He expected resistance, expected at least a flinch or a reaction, but Steven didn't even shift his weight. He placed a hand casually on his hip, his fingers brushing lightly against the belt of his trousers. It was a minor gesture, almost invisible, but the contrast between his relaxed composure and the general's tense readiness created a strange, almost magnetic tension in the air. For a few seconds nothing happened. Just silence. Breaths were held. Soldiers leaned slightly forward, curious and cautious, straining to see what would happen next. Someone whispered almost under their breath, "He's not even scared, how?" The murmurs spread quietly through the ranks, but no one dared interrupt the moment. Everyone knew that if they moved too quickly, it might break the fragile balance of anticipation that had settled over the courtyard. The general's grip tightened subtly, a reminder of his authority. And yet, even in that small, deliberate motion, Steven remained completely still. His calm gaze didn't waver, his breathing slow and measured. The tiniest hint of a smile, barely noticeable, flickered across his face, and it was enough to make the general pause. The officers around them exchanged glances, subtle nods of acknowledgement. Even the staff, who had come to observe from the periphery, felt a shift, an almost imperceptible change in the energy of the courtyard. Every movement, no matter how small, was magnified. A soldier's foot tapping, a whisper, a finger adjusting a camera, everything became part of the slow, deliberate tension. The scene was no longer about physical confrontation. It was about patience, presence, and perception. Who would break first? Who would show weakness? And in that quiet, stretching moment, it became clear. Power wasn't about force. It was about control, calm, deliberate, unshakable control. Nobody expected what would happen next. By now, the entire military base seemed to be holding its breath. Soldiers, officers, and staff alike had stopped whatever routine task they were performing. Even the distant hum of machinery and the occasional squawk of a bird seemed muted under the weight of the moment. All eyes were fixed on Steven Seagal and the general, standing in tense stillness at the center of the courtyard. Every subtle movement, every flicker of an expression, was amplified in the silence. Phones had quietly begun to rise. A few junior officers, careful not to attract attention from their seniors, angled their cameras to record the scene. Others were hesitant, unsure whether they should intervene or simply observe. Yet, the recordings themselves told a story. The calm steadiness of Seagal contrasted sharply with the tense, rigid posture of the general. Each frame captured a moment of subtle domination and unspoken authority. Nearby soldiers craned their necks to see better. Some whispered to their comrades, careful to remain almost invisible. "I've never seen anything like this," one said. He's not even moving," another replied. The whispers spread in low, cautious waves, bouncing from group to group. There was no laughter, no overt tension release, just the quiet hum of anticipation, growing heavier by the second. Even the seasoned veterans among them felt a strange, almost magnetic pull toward the unfolding scene. The general, sensing the scrutiny of every pair of eyes, shifted slightly. His hand brushed against Steven's hair again, a subtle, deliberate reminder of his authority. The soldiers flinched collectively, a ripple running through the ranks like a shiver of electricity. Cameras tilted to capture the moment, and suddenly the courtyard was alive with frozen attention, a silent audience recording history as it quietly unfolded before them. Some of the officers stepped closer, curious, calculating. Their eyes darted between Steven's calm face and the general's taut posture. "Will he react?" one asked under his breath. Another shook his head slowly, eyes wide, as though afraid to voice the question too loudly. Their reactions, the careful observation, the hesitant body language, became part of the story itself. It wasn't just Steven or the general anymore. It was everyone witnessing, everyone aware that this moment carried a lesson beyond physical strength. Even the staff, cooks, technicians, and administrative personnel, had gathered at the edges of the courtyard, craning their necks for a glimpse. The usually mundane environment of the base had transformed into a stage for quiet drama. The subtle shifting of shoulders, the soft intake of breath, the almost imperceptible widening of eyes, every human detail added weight to the tension. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, curiosity, and silent admiration. Steven's calm remained unbroken. His gaze swept slowly over the crowd, almost acknowledging their attention without arrogance or showmanship. It was as though he understood that real influence came not from force, but from presence. The general, still rigid, seemed to notice this as well. A brief hesitation flickered across his face, a silent admission that the balance of power in this moment was not what he had anticipated. Phones continued to record every subtle movement, every shift in posture, every whispered reaction. The soldiers, unable to look away, became part of the scene themselves, a living, breathing proof of how presence and composure could command attention without a single word. Some leaned closer, holding their breath. Others simply stared, unable to blink, unwilling to miss a single second. Even the faintest movements of Steven's hand, the way he shifted his weight just slightly, or the barely noticeable lift of his eyebrows, every micro-expression was magnified by the collective attention of the crowd. The courtyard was no longer just a training ground. It was a lens through which everyone witnessed the demonstration of quiet authority, respect, and discipline. By the time the general finally realized that his expected reaction had not come, the crowd had already begun to internalize the lesson. It wasn't about aggression. It wasn't about shouting or brute force. It was about control, poise, and the quiet confidence that demanded attention simply by existing. Every phone recording, every wide-eyed soldier, every whispering observer became proof that what was unfolding was something extraordinary, a masterclass in calm strength. Nobody in that courtyard would forget this moment, and nobody could deny that the real power in the room was quietly, effortlessly, unmistakably demonstrated. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. After minutes of tense anticipation, every soldier, officer, and staff member was frozen in place, watching closely. Steven Seagal had stood perfectly still throughout the general's test of authority. Every subtle gesture, every whispered reaction from the crowd, every camera lens pointed at him only heightened the suspense. And now, the moment of revelation was about to unfold. The general's grip had tightened again, perhaps expecting the slightest flinch, a reaction that would affirm his dominance. But Steven remained unshaken. His calm gaze met the general's eyes without aggression, without challenge, yet somehow exuding quiet power. For a brief moment, the courtyard was completely silent. Not a single bird chirped, not a single soldier moved. Time seemed to stretch. Then, almost imperceptibly, Steven raised his hand. It was slow, deliberate, controlled. A small, fluid movement, yet charged with authority. With the gentlest touch, he released the general's hold, not with force, not with retaliation, but with a calm mastery that left everyone startled. The general's hand lifted, eyes widening ever so slightly, as if realizing in that instant that the power dynamic had shifted, not through aggression but through presence. The soldiers exhaled collectively, though almost silently as though afraid to break the spell. Phones continued to record, capturing the subtle but unmistakable lesson in control. Every small motion, every flicker of the eyes, every measured breath became part of the narrative unfolding before them. Steven didn't raise his voice, didn't strike a dramatic pose. He simply stood, steady, confident, and unshakable. That was enough. Then, in one smooth movement, he demonstrated a basic defensive technique. Not flashy, not exaggerated, just precise, controlled, efficient. The general's posture shifted slightly as he absorbed the demonstration, realizing that this was not a display of aggression, but of calm, deliberate expertise. The subtlety of Steven's mastery impressed even the most skeptical observers. It wasn't about defeating the general, it was about showing that control could be achieved without chaos or noise. The crowd reacted slowly at first. Eyes widened, whispers circulated. Officers exchanged nods of respect, recognizing the wisdom and discipline displayed before them. Soldiers shifted uneasily in their boots, some leaning forward, trying to memorize every detail of the demonstration. Even the administrative staff, standing at the edges of the courtyard, felt a rush of admiration. What they had witnessed was something rarely seen, the combination of authority, calm, and skill, unspoken but undeniable. Steven's calm didn't just impress the general, it changed the energy of the entire base. The tension that had weighed heavily on the courtyard lifted slightly, replaced by a collective sense of respect. The general, tall and stern, finally nodded, a subtle but genuine acknowledgement that he had learned something in those quiet moments. There was no embarrassment, no dramatic defeat, only the recognition that real power often resides in restraint, not aggression. The lesson extended beyond martial skill. Every subtle movement, every measured breath, and every silent moment spoke volumes about patience, discipline, and respect. Soldiers glanced at one another, some whispering quietly, "It's not about strength, it's about presence." Others simply nodded, absorbing the understated power displayed in front of them. Phones recorded it all, capturing not just the demonstration but the reactions, the collective understanding that real authority isn't loud or flashy. As Steven finally stepped back, he gave a subtle bow to the general, an unspoken gesture of respect that completed the lesson. The general returned it, acknowledging not only Steven's skill but also the profound calm that had commanded attention without a single shout. The courtyard seemed to exhale together, a release of tension and a shared understanding of what they had witnessed. In that moment, it became clear to everyone, true mastery doesn't need drama. True authority doesn't need noise. Real respect is earned quietly, through composure, wisdom, and the subtle demonstration of skill. The scene wasn't just a display for the cameras, it was a live lesson, recorded in the minds of every soldier present. And as the cameras kept rolling, the whispers spread throughout the base. Some would tell the story later, some would keep the memory vivid in their minds, but all would remember the day when calm strength quietly, effortlessly, and undeniably won. The courtyard had quieted, but the lesson lingered in the air like a tangible presence. Every soldier, officer, and staff member carried it with them, though few could articulate it in words. It wasn't about martial skill or hierarchy anymore. It was about the power of calm, the authority of restraint, and the invisible strength that comes from patience and presence. In that moment, Steven Seagal had taught more than any drill or manual could. Many of the younger soldiers looked around at one another, trying to process what they had just witnessed. They had been trained to respect rank, to respond quickly to commands, and to assert authority in moments of tension. Yet here, in the quiet desert morning, they had learned a lesson that no rank or title could convey. Real strength is often invisible. It is quiet, composed, and deliberate. It doesn't need to shout to be recognized. It doesn't need to prove itself with force. Officers whispered among themselves, quietly reflecting on the subtle mastery they had observed. One senior officer, usually unshakable in demeanor, admitted almost under his breath, "I didn't realize calm could be this commanding." Another nodded, eyes still fixed on the center of the courtyard, where Steven stood like a still point in a storm of tension. Even the general, who had moments before tested his authority, now understood the depth of the demonstration. Strength isn't always measured by dominance. Sometimes it is measured by the ability to control one's own actions and remain composed under pressure. For the soldiers, this lesson was immediately relatable. Military life often demands quick responses, loud commands, and visible displays of control. But the scene they had just witnessed revealed a deeper truth. The most effective leaders aren't always the loudest or the most aggressive. They are the ones who can think clearly, act decisively, and maintain their composure when others falter. They are the ones who inspire respect through quiet confidence, not through intimidation. And this truth extended beyond the military. The story of Steven Seagal in the courtyard became a mirror for everyday life. In offices, homes, and social circles, people are constantly faced with situations that test their patience and resilience. Arguments, misunderstandings, and moments of tension are inevitable. Yet the lesson from the desert was clear. Reacting impulsively, shouting, or trying to assert dominance rarely achieves the desired outcome. Instead, observing, remaining calm, and responding thoughtfully often creates a more powerful and lasting effect. The soldiers began to relate it to their own experiences. A young recruit thought about his first confrontation during training exercises, where panic had led him to make mistakes. An officer remembered a heated discussion with a colleague that escalated unnecessarily because no one had paused to breathe and think. In those moments, they realized that the lesson they had witnessed was universally applicable. Patience and composure allow clarity of action and respect from others. Even the general seemed to reflect on this truth. In his acknowledgement of Steven's calm, he demonstrated that respect can be earned without force. It was a subtle but profound reminder that leadership isn't about proving who is stronger or more aggressive. It's about creating an environment where confidence, competence, and composure are recognized and appreciated. The soldiers could see that, and it inspired a quiet sense of admiration and introspection. Steven himself didn't speak about these lessons explicitly. He didn't need to. The demonstration, the quiet authority, the subtle movements, and the calm control communicated everything. In that silence, the courtyard absorbed a teaching far more powerful than words. The presence of someone truly in control conveyed the message. Life rewards patience, calm thinking, and steady resolve. Overreaction, force, and haste may create temporary results, but lasting respect and influence come from composed mastery. By the time the soldiers returned to their routines, the lesson had taken root. In small ways they carried it with them, in the way they walked, the way they addressed their peers, and in the moments of decision that would follow in the coming weeks. The story of that morning, the subtle yet undeniable demonstration of power, became more than an anecdote. It became a guiding principle. Strength is quiet, influence is calm, and respect is earned through presence and integrity. And for the viewers witnessing this story, whether through the camera's recording or through retelling, the lesson remains universal. In any challenge, professional, personal, or social, the principles hold true. Remain calm, act with intention, and let your composure speak louder than words. The most remarkable victories are often the ones achieved without shouting, without force, and without spectacle. Quietly, patiently, and with unwavering confidence. This was more than a military demonstration. It was a life lesson visible to all who were watching, and one that anyone could carry into their own world. The courtyard had finally begun to breathe again. Soldiers adjusted their uniforms, officers straightened their posture, and even the staff who had been quietly observing from the edges of the training grounds returned to their routines. Yet, despite the outward calm, there was an energy lingering in the air. A sense that what they had just witnessed wasn't merely a demonstration, but a lesson they would carry with them forever. Phones were lowered, cameras clicked off, and yet every person present remained internally focused, replaying the scene in their minds. Steven Seagal had stepped back, his hands loosely resting at his sides, his expression calm, almost unreadable. He didn't announce any conclusions, didn't give any speeches, and didn't seek applause or recognition. The entire lesson had been communicated through his presence. Measured, deliberate, and utterly composed. Soldiers watched him for a moment longer, some leaning slightly forward, as though trying to memorize every detail of his stance, every subtle shift of his weight, every nuance of his calm expression. It was the kind of moment that stayed with you, long after the eyes had looked away. The general, standing a few steps away, nodded slightly, a gesture of respect, humility, and recognition. Though his posture remained disciplined, there was an unmistakable shift in his energy. He had come expecting to assert control, to test the strength of a visitor, yet the result had been the opposite. Instead of dominance, he had witnessed mastery. Instead of aggression, he had experienced calm authority. And as he glanced around at the soldiers who had been quietly observing, he realized something profound. Real power doesn't shout, it radiates. It influences without forcing. It commands respect without demanding it. For the soldiers, this realization sparked a ripple of introspection. Some exchanged quiet glances, nodding subtly, silently acknowledging the truth they had just seen. Others simply stood, hands at their sides, trying to absorb the weight of the lesson without words. Every whispered reaction, every careful observation, every moment of hesitation had become part of the narrative. It wasn't just about a demonstration of skill anymore, it was about understanding a principle that could apply to every facet of life. And that, for the viewers watching this story unfold, whether through cameras, recordings, or retellings, is the central question. What would you do in that moment? Would you react impulsively, driven by ego or fear? Or would you, like Steven, remain calm, deliberate, and composed, letting your presence and measured actions communicate more than words ever could? This question isn't confined to a military courtyard. It resonates in offices, classrooms, homes, and social situations. It echoes in moments of tension, conflict, and decision-making across the entire spectrum of life. Imagine yourself in that scene. Picture the tension building, the eyes of countless observers upon you, the weight of expectation pressing down. Could you remain composed? Could you hold your ground without shouting or showing aggression? How would your calm presence influence those around you? These aren't rhetorical questions. They are invitations to reflect, to pause, and to consider the power of quiet confidence in your own life. Even as the soldiers slowly returned to their routines, the lesson lingered like a shadow, subtle, unspoken, yet undeniable. It became a guiding principle. Strength is not always measured by how loud you can be or how forcefully you can assert yourself. Influence is not always proven by the speed of your reaction or the sharpness of your command. True respect, lasting authority, and meaningful impact are earned through composure, clarity, and deliberate action. And this is the lesson Steven Seagal left behind that morning, not as a lecture, not as a performance, but as a living example. So here's the question for you watching this story unfold. How would you respond if faced with a challenge that tests not only your skill but your patience, your presence, and your composure? Could you stand quietly, observe, and act with intention rather than impulse? Could you achieve influence through calm mastery rather than forceful assertion? And if so, how would that change the way people around you perceive your strength and character? Take a moment to reflect. Think about a time in your own life when you reacted too quickly, spoke too loudly, or let tension dictate your actions. Now imagine handling it differently, calmly, deliberately, with measured confidence. How might that have changed the outcome? How might it influence the people watching, the colleagues, friends, or family members who look to you for guidance? This is not a hypothetical exercise. It is a practical principle that applies every day. And here's the final thought. The soldiers, officers, and staff at that base were forever changed by a simple, quiet display of mastery. Steven Seagal didn't need to shout, threaten, or dominate to leave a lasting impression. He let his calm presence and subtle actions speak for him, and in doing so he demonstrated that the quietest people often leave the deepest impact. So what about you? Would you let your calm strength guide you? Would you respond with clarity, patience, and quiet confidence in your next moment of challenge? Comment below with the word respect if you believe composure and mastery are the truest forms of power. Share your thoughts on how you handle tension in your own life. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because stories like this aren't just for watching. They're for learning, reflecting, and applying. Remember, the greatest victories are often silent. The most enduring influence is subtle. And the most powerful lessons are shown, not told. The question isn't just what Steven Seagal did, it's what will you do the next time life tests your patience, your confidence, and your presence? The courtyard may have returned to routine, but the lesson will remain, carried silently in the minds and hearts of everyone who witnessed it.